You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in the show are those of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. Join us as we discuss those topics and more, free from the ideologies of religion and superstition.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hoosier Humanist Hour. This show is put together by the members of FreeThought Fort Wayne. And just as a reminder, all the things we say on here are just strictly the views of the hosts and not, any official position of FreeThought Fort Wayne. To get in touch with us, you can reach us on Facebook.com, FreeThought FW. If you want to ask any questions, anything like that. Today on the show, we have Andrew, we have Chris, myself, V, and a very special guest, Seth. Seth has joined us previously on the show. He joined us to talk about homeless people around Fort Wayne when we were gathering, gift bags for the homeless people. We're trying to do a little, outreach to the homeless, and Seth joined us to discuss, how things are going with the homeless people. And today, he has joined us to talk about the Dakota Access Pipeline. Now, this show is being recorded just the day after the election, so as tempting as it may be to talk about that, I think we can probably leave that for next week. And actually, by the time the show airs, it'll be a week after the elections. For next time, we'll have a little more time to actually understand what happened, who voted, who didn't, why things turned out the way they did, and all that. But for now, we can just focus on the Dakota Access Pipeline. And just to give a tiny bit of background here, the Dakota Access Pipeline is an oil pipeline that is planned to be built that would start in North Dakota and reach Illinois. It's got a huge capacity, something like over 400,000 barrels per day, which is a lot of barrels per day. And I think they can even reach a peak of over 500,000 barrels per day. It's about a 1,100-mile pipeline. And currently, there is some Native American tribes that are saying that the pipeline would go through lands that they consider sacred. It would go under the Missouri River, and people are afraid that if there's a problem with the river, with the pipeline, the river can be contaminated. So I believe people are there by the thousands protesting against this pipeline. And just a few days ago, Seth went to the protests and spent, I believe, a day or two there. And hopefully he can tell us some more about his experience, what he saw there, why he went there, things like that. So, Seth, thank you for joining us.
So I went there last week on Tuesday. I left, and I got there Wednesday afternoon. I was only there for Wednesday and Thursday, and came home Thursday late, and then got home Friday. But anyways, when I got there, I showed up just in time. I didn't really know where I was going to, or I honestly didn't have any plan of what I was doing. It was a very spur of the moment thing. But I got to Cannonball, North Dakota, just as a clergy group was meeting for their planned march the following day. Most of the marches had been confrontational, and this one was planned to be completely peaceful. They had talked to the police and the sheriffs and stuff the day before or the week before to let them know that this is going to be clergy from across the country. They had put out an invitation for 100 clergy members to come for a unified march, and they ended up having I think it was 560 that ended up showing up. So it was a really huge group that showed up. They went out on Thursday morning, and the bridge, there's a bridge at the Cannonball, North Dakota site, right where the Cannonball River meets the May River, or near that area anyways. There's a bridge that's been kind of a battleground zone. It's got lots of burned out dump trucks and minivans and cars. It's got police barricades and concrete. The clergy met there at the bridge for a peaceful protest, and it was actually quite a sight seeing that many people on this bridge. And on the other side of this concrete barrier, there were probably officers with tear gas masks, full body armor, militarized police tank vehicles, AR-15s, batons. I mean, it was kind of, there were snipers on the hill. While we were there, there's a helicopter that was flying around, that any time it would fly above us, we would lose our data signal for our phones. And when I first got there, almost constantly, and they told me when that plane was collecting metadata from your phones and also blocking signal, and I thought it kind of sounded conspiratorial, like, you know, it's like, oh, that can't really be happening. But sure enough, every time that airplane would fly around us, my signal would go to the exclamation point, and then it would go away, and then as the plane got further away, the data would come back.
Wow.
So they really were out there blocking reservation property and blocking their signals. And I think that there were some complaints being made to the FAA to create that area as protected airspace so they couldn't buzz the reservations like that, because the police aren't allowed to enter the reservation.
Of course.
So they don't think they should be able to fly over either. So at the protest that day, there with the clergy, it was a helicopter that was buzzing it. So that happened. But also, going back to the night before, when I went out there, I thought, as I was going out, I was thinking that the stars out at this reservation are going to be phenomenal, because, you know, there's no lights out there. It's going to be, you know, you're going to be able to see everything. And when I got out there, off in the distance, there were just, I don't know, probably 24 spotlights that were the great big construction type floodlights that you see on construction zones working at night. They had those shining they had them on the other side of the river, shining at the reservation. And these lights were sitting on top of these, the large mounds of hills, or whatever they would call them. But the hills out there are interesting in that they kind of, the way that they erode, the wall, the sides kind of end up being vertical, and then you've got a mound up top. And so up on top of that, they had some of the lights, and one of those mounds was actually a burial ground where they got at least 20 documented ancestors, and the pipeline has set up these floodlights on top of there to flood the reservation with light for whatever reason, either to be annoyance or, you know, a psychological warfare type thing. But it really was a blinding thing where anytime you would look in that direction at night, you had to cover your eyes in order to be able to see what was around you. So in addition to that, they had the airplanes buzzing or above head. When I was coming in, I was followed by a police officer who the road said road closed ahead, so I wanted to see like what was going on up there. And they closed down 1806, which is the highway that goes into Cannonball from Bismarck, North Dakota. And when I was driving in, I stopped to take a picture at one point, and a police officer passed me in the other direction, and he turned around and came back and followed me. And he stayed just like as close as he could without hitting my bumper, I think.
Oh my goodness, wow.
About 15 minutes. And the whole time I had my cruise control on, and I was just holding my steering wheel, making sure that I stayed right in the middle of the lines and didn't, you know, give him any reason to pull me over. And I was waiting for him to pull me over and to give the whole, you know, am I being detained? Am I free to go? Line, but I'd have probably been beaten at that point. But they were very aggressive with the police presence there. I passed probably over 100 police cars coming the other way as I was going there, and that was because it was kind of quitting time for the pipeline, so they reduced the amount of police presence they have when the pipeline people go home. But yeah, the dichotomy of the two sides, seeing the one side with, women and men that are holding water bottles of water and signs that say water is life on one side, and the militarized police with tear gas, rifles, batons, and full body armor and militarized police tanks on the other side. If you were looking at it from an alien perspective, it wouldn't be too hard to see which side is there because of money and which side is there because of passion for what is right.
Of course. Hey, let me ask you this. Were any of the protesters armed at all? Like, did you see any protesters armed?
So every day they have their meetings that have a peaceful protest training session. I don't know exactly. So none of the protesters were armed. All the protesters, before they can go protest, they have to go through a training session with the Navy. So yeah, so the protesters, none of the protesters are armed. They all are there peacefully, and they actually have, before anybody can go out onto the front lines to protest, they require people to go through a training session. I think there's actually even a few of them that they go through. That you're taught that it's peaceful, it's prayerful, and it's legal. You're not breaking any rules. But they were very adamant about that nobody break any laws. And on one day, they actually had a thing where the police said that one of the protesters fired a firearm. Nobody fired a firearm that day. The lady that they said had a firearm, she had a decorated stick, and I forget what she had called it, but it was a like a prayer staff, or it was this ceremonial staff that she had, and they said that it was a firearm, but it was by no means a firearm. She was actually arrested, I believe, but they never did recover a weapon. They never found a weapon, but they charged her with that. Most protesters that they were arresting, at one point when you were arrested, you had a $250 bond to get out, and they raised that to $1,500 or $2,500. They raised it by a lot, and they also increased the charges so that any protesters that got arrested were given three felonies for conspiracy for government interference with government operations and trespassing. They had a few different charges they were giving them.
Wow. Now, does anybody actually stay like blocking the actual pipeline? Or is the pipeline still being built and they're just around it, kind of thing?
The pipeline is still being built. At one point, they had a camp that was set up. They called it North Camp. They had a camp that was set up on the location where the pipeline was supposed to go through. The government, through the police department there, the sheriffs, they went in at one point and cleared that camp and confiscated all of the tents and camping supplies and camping gear. They put it in dump trucks, and they brought it just outside the reservation, and they dumped it on an empty lot and just put it all out there. And so all the people that were there, I think that there were 300 or 600 people. There was a bunch of people on that North Camp. All their gear ended up just being piled and put in a dump truck. And there were rumors that the police officers had been urinating on the belongings and stuff, and that there was a lot of just disrespect and desecration of the campers' materials before it was returned. But all that stuff, some of those campers had gone home before they got their stuff back.
Of course.
Some of it, it's just, it's impossible to find it again. But so they were sorting a lot of that material at the camp when I was there and putting it in different piles of sleeping bags are here and and mattress pads are here, and tents are over here, and clothes and bags and stuff over here. Wow. And they ended up doing a thing where, if you need something, take something. If you have something, leave something type of a system.
That's interesting, yeah.
But when I got there, there were about 600 campers at the campground, at the campsite that I was at, and there were 5 or 7 camps that were set up at various locations. When I left over the weekend, they said that 3,500 more people showed up for the different camps that were there. And so the camps, I posted a video on my Facebook page just today that really shows kind of the size of how big these camps are. I equated it to about the size of a college campus. That's just a large, spread out area that just has hundreds and hundreds of tents and teepees and yurts and various little. They're building as many of these little buildings as they can that are just probably 8 or 10 feet wide and maybe 20 to 25 feet long to use as kitchens or barracks for camping or for sleeping. They're trying to get those up in preparation for winter because the plan is to keep the protest going through the winter and the occupation going through the winter.
Wow. How is the weather there currently, and what is it going to be when winter comes? I assume it's going to get pretty cold out there.
Yeah, so last year, the year before, there was 3 feet of snow this time of year. When I was there, it was in the 60 and 70 degree range during the day. So they're really getting a warm November right now that's just not typical. They do expect the temperatures to plummet here pretty soon. They're asking anybody that sends supplies or donations to send cold weather gear. Nothing like some people are sending knitted gloves or knitted hats and stuff, and it's like a lot of that stuff just doesn't cut it when it literally gets into the negative, teens to 20s with a wind chill in the 60s below. It's bitter cold there. There's going to be a lot of snow. Pretty soon.
Wow. I can't imagine having to do that. When do you know, I guess, like where they are right now, like when is the pipeline actually supposed to cross over at that point and continue down?
Yeah. So on November 18th, their permit expires for the under the Missouri River permit, and they have to reapply. So the goal of the water protectors right now is to prevent that from happening. They're building the place where they're going to be drilling. They've got this concrete fortress that they're building that's, I don't know, several hundred feet by several hundred feet with a concrete wall that it looks like they've got, it's some sort of it's a thing that they kind of spread it apart and they fill it with rocks, and it creates this barrier that's vertical and looks like a castle wall essentially. And again, that's on Facebook. If you go search for, there's a drone username, and he's doing a lot of drone footage of the pipeline and of the fortress that they're building and of the water protectors in the camps. So he's got a lot of good footage that he's putting up. And from his footage, you can see this place where they're creating this barrier. And inside of that is where they're going to start drilling to go under the Missouri River. And the plan was that they're going to go 60 feet under when they go under the river. And that's going to be by November 18th is when they hope to be done or through. And that's when the water protectors are hoping to stop them. But once that's, there's also, there's still a lot of pipeline that they're going to be putting in.
No, of course. So this is not just, these people, they're not just protesting to protect their sacred grounds. They're also protesting because they're afraid that this is gonna poison the river, basically, if
Absolutely.
something happens.
Yeah. And so this pipeline was going to go through Bismarck and go under the Missouri River in Bismarck, North Dakota. But they said that it was too, through the process of planning, they decided that it was too dangerous to go through Bismarck because it's too heavily populated. And so they went through a more desolate area where there's fewer people. But you're talking about the Missouri River. So if the pipeline breaks or has a spill, the Missouri River feeds everything from there down to the Gulf of Mexico is going to be polluted with an oil spill there. And there are several cities along the way that get their sole source of water supply from the Missouri River.
Of course, it's a major water body. Yeah.
Yeah. So there could be a catastrophic loss of water supply. If that were,
I'm looking at a map over here of the Missouri River, and it looks like it passes through Omaha, Nebraska, Kansas City, St. Louis. I mean, this is a very big deal. I mean, I see where it passes by Bismarck, but just because they bypass that, I don't understand how they can say that it's too dangerous for Bismarck, but are they somehow going to block the flow, or are they going to clean it up before it reaches all these other places?
Yeah, it's got, I mean, if you look at there's still, there's been several other major oil line spill or pipeline spills here just in the last couple months. So their argument is that a leak is inevitable at some point. It's just a matter of time. And with the fracking going on that's going out there, so the oil that's coming there is from the shale oil field where they're fracking and doing that stuff, and it increases the frequency of earthquakes in that area as well. So one of the primary threats to a pipeline like that, or one of the major threats, is earthquakes, where the earth shifts and causes a break in the pipeline. And so they're increasing the likelihood of those happening, and they're increasing the likelihood that it has the potential to get into the Missouri River when they do it.
Right. So, wow, a lot to think about there. I mean, that is such a major water body. About how many people would you say are in total in all the different camps and all that? Any idea on that?
I'm not sure, but it's like the camp that I was at, they said that there were 650 people and then 3,500 more came. I know that there's just been a groundswell of support that showed up in the last, so the day that all the people were marking their check-ins at Facebook, that kind of really helped bring light to the situation to a lot of people that weren't aware of it before. When everybody was checking in. And so I think from that also started the process where everybody started to think about heading out there, and then thousands of people have shown up, and more are on their way, and they're the people that are there are planning on being there for the entire winter, and longer. And some people, when I was there, I talked to several people who had been there for months. Some have been there since earlier this spring when it first started, and they've been living in these camps this whole time, going out each day to the front lines to protest. And it's just, there's a lot of commitment and dedication from the people that are there. Whereas on the other side, go ahead.
Did you what does the front line look like? I mean, do they just just kind of, if you can describe the scene at the front line and what that looks like?
Yeah, so the day that I arrived was the day that the reporter was shot with a rubber bullet. And on that particular day, the water protectors had crossed the river, and they were meeting the police force kind of at the line. A lot of it doesn't happen at the actual point of the pipeline, but it's rather at the point that the reservation meets the easement, and
Okay.
that's part of the argument too, is that the easement is that the easement can't be used for a pipeline, and so, but yeah, so that day they crossed the river, and they were, and it's a lot of shouting that water is life, and Mini-Wakoni, which is water is life in Sioux, and
Okay.
so they they're they're shouting that, and they're some of it's talking to the police that are there. How can you do this? How can you be on the side of big oil? And there's actually been several resignations by the police officers that are there, where they've resigned because of what they've seen happen there. On one particular day, when they were actually close to the equipment in the pipeline had people there with dogs, and the dogs were actually attacking the water protectors.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, there's been a lot of things that have been clear violations of constitutional rights of people, and there's after this is over, or even, it's starting now, but it's going to go on for a while. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits for the different things that have happened like this. But those things take, weeks, months, years before they're ever even heard, or anything happens with it.
But it's not just the Sioux tribe, right? There's people from other tribes. Like, is it a diverse crowd that's out there?
Absolutely, and that's the thing. There's hundreds of tribes that are being represented there from all across the country. There's actually people that are from all around the world. When I was there, I had lunch with a lady from Israel. The day after I left, a group from Japan showed up.
Wow.
They've got people there from all over the world, from all sorts of tribes. So that's one thing that's also some of the Native American prophecy says that there's going to be a coming together of the nations to fight the black snake that comes from the north. Which, when you look at it, it's like, wow, that's actually, it fits pretty well here.
Oh yeah.
So the unification that's happening is something that's that's not ever happened before in Native American history, where you have so many tribes and so many not even tribe groups, the clergy that came together, just the support that they're getting is just overwhelming, and it comes from so many different places. That unity is what's kind of I guess really unique about the situation as well, that the Native Americans have never. Yeah.
With so many people protesting out there, it's literally in the thousands, many thousands. It's funny. I haven't heard anything about it on TV or on radio. I guess this is not a small protest. This is a major news story. Thousands of people. It touches on environment. It touches on religious rights. It touches on Native American rights. It's so many different faces to this problem. Land ownership rights, if you will. Does the federal government have the right to, just take your land and do whatever they want with it? Do they not? And, why is that not represented in the news stories more heavily? Do you think it's just the election, or?
Well, I think, you're going to have some people that talk about the conspiracy aspect, where you look at who owns what and who has financial interests where, and, you're going to find some dotted lines that connect to say that the news media isn't interested in representing this story because of who owns the news media. And so, it has started to get into the news somewhat, but for the amount of stuff that's happening there, for the time that it's been going on, it really hasn't been represented like you would expect for a protest of this size and this magnitude and this duration. there hasn't. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they didn't even know that it was going on, and and it's just hard to believe that that it could go to this level without anybody or without people knowing about it.
No, that's true. One small calculation that I just ran here. We said it could be 470,000 barrels per day. Let's say that's times $50 a barrel. Just to use a round figure, that's $23.5 million per day. Now, if we assume that this thing runs at full capacity for 365 days, that would be $8.5 billion of oil per year that would flow through that pipeline. I mean, I don't know, the conspiracy theorists may actually have a grain of truth on this one. I mean, I usually avoid the conspiracy theories, but when you think that this is potentially $8.5 billion of oil, I mean, you can see it. I read somewhere that this pipeline can carry fully half of the oil that's generated from those oil fields. I think it's called the Bakken oil field, and then there was another name also.
Yeah, the Bakken oil field, that's where a lot of the shales or a lot of the oil is coming from. And one of the other things that they're saying is that those oil fields aren't going to last a long time, and the pipeline is still going to be there once it's gone and once its use is over. So.
Now, Sid, do you know if the oil is extracted through fracking or? Because a lot of people have concerns with the process of fracking as well.
Right, that was one of the things that was mentioned. I'm not directly aware, but it was mentioned that the fracking is going on because I know that some of the people there were talking about fracking and increasing the earthquakes, and that being a concern that it breaks the pipeline.
Yeah. There's no reason. There's no other reason. I mean, if it's not extracted through fracking, they shouldn't cause these earthquakes. It means the process of fracking that breaks up all the rocks and stuff and just changes the structure of the ground underneath. That's apparently causing this, from what I understand. So if they were just sucking it out like they would in, let's say, Saudi Arabia or some of those places, that shouldn't cause those kind of earthquakes. So I think at least partially must be through fracking.
Yeah. Well, I need to wrap up, but I wanted to just let you guys know also that if anybody wants to send help out there, if you go on Facebook and look for some of the different camps, a lot of those have direct contact information where you can, if you wanted to send financial support and a donation, if you wanted to send material, they really need winter gear. That's like a desperate need that they have, and below zero sleeping gear, sleeping bags and things.
Well, just to mention something real quick, not to interrupt you, sorry, but we're not allowed on the radio on this show to have a call to action, so we can inform people, but we can't tell them to do anything. Just as a point of clarification.
So and that's just it's just more of a thing that if you want to send something,
right.
Just send, some people are sending clothes that are like T-shirts and, just things that they get where, I was talking to one of the elders there and they said that when they sort through some of the donations, about 2/3 of it goes into a pile of things they can't use and another third goes into the pile of stuff they can use.
Okay.
And people that want to go out there, one of the things they're warning those people, a lot of people are coming out there right now and it's putting a strain on the resources. So they're telling anybody else that comes out to try to come out with the supplies that you will need, even including your own water, just because that way you're not strained on the resources that are already there.
They already have people for a small city, so they got to feed all those people. Water, all that is becoming a bottleneck, I guess. Wow. Well, if you have to go, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate the insight that you've given us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
You too.
Wow. So, Chris, what do you think? I mean, this is very serious out there. You know, people are putting up a fight.
Yeah, it's a very interesting situation. I just think it's a victim of its timing.
Yeah.
More than anything else, because I'm sorry, it's even now the election is still overwhelming the news, and it's going to continue at least for another week.
Right.
So I feel like it's going to be probably another week until we start hearing more about this particular situation with the pipeline and with the Native Americans and the protests and the injustices. I'm looking forward to that time, because it'll be once everybody is over the shock and awe of this election. Once we finally recover emotionally and psychologically, I think we'll finally be able to start learning something about this other situation.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I can't wait for the news to again be news and not about Hillary Clinton's emails or what did Donald Trump say on this or that, but to be able to tackle some of these bigger issues and all that. One thing to remind the listeners is just not that long ago, we had the Keystone XL pipeline, which actually shares a somewhat similar route. Only it was supposed to start in Canada, in Alberta, the tar sands up there, and it was supposed to reach all the way down to the Gulf, where this Dakota Access pipeline, starts in North Dakota and ends in Illinois. But, I think the Keystone XL pipeline was also supposed to go through North Dakota, South Dakota. I'm not sure if it was going through Nebraska or Iowa on the way down to the Gulf, but it was ending up in Texas, where this is supposed to just reach Illinois, from what I understand. But that was eventually blocked by the Obama administration, using a few tricks there to block it. In this case, I don't see, even if Obama tries to do something about this, President Trump, I can easily see that decision being reversed just a couple months down the road. So I don't think we can rely on the government to take care of it in this case. I think you probably agree with me, Chris.
Yeah, no, definitely, because of the fact that Trump has actually said it. He's come out and physically said it, that he's going to make sure that the pipeline goes through.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly a question at this point.
Right.
Of course, I honestly kind of feel the same way about most of what he's said during this presidential campaign, that most of it is probably legitimately going to happen. As much as people were calling Hillary Clinton a liar, lying Hillary or whatever. I don't know if we ever truly called Trump a liar per se. We definitely called him ignorant, because he would often state things that were not even remotely factual. But I don't really consider him to be a liar. And so everything that he said, I think he's actually going to try to follow through with. Now, as far as how much success he's going to have, that's a different story.
Could he, let's say that he is just ignorant. Do you think he could be convinced by, let's say that he was to sit down with some science advisors, things like that. Do you think there's a chance of him being convinced to take a more environmentally friendly stand on global warming, any of those other issues?
Dude, I swear to God, I've been sitting here for the past, 48 hours since the election results. I've been sitting here just turning over in my head. Should I try to apply to have some influence in this Republican cabinet, so to speak, because of the fact that he's he's currently hiring, so to speak. And
Right.
I would love to have any sort of influence in that reign because, goodness gracious, Republicans have a notorious history of not being very scientific and basically ignoring and or firing majority of scientists and educators.
Right.
And it really concerns me. I would love to be put in a position where I would have that kind of positive influence to keep the entire system of science and education from coming to the ground.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that was one thing that we didn't touch on that while talking with Seth. There's so we mentioned that the river could get polluted and that river supplies water to all these big towns. I mean, St. Louis. We mentioned them all, and then there's the religious freedoms of the Sioux tribe, but also the global warming aspect of this. I mean, this is 470,000 barrels of oil per day that could potentially flow through this pipeline. Now, currently, all that oil flows on rail, but nothing is to stop them from increasing the production and keeping everything that goes on rail and adding that pipeline, just straight up adding the additional capacity. I think that's got some pretty serious implications for global warming, all that. I mean, 470,000 barrels per day is a significant chunk.
I think what I think is going to happen with that is that it's going to drop the price of oil and gasoline.
Of course.
So much to the point that we're going to see a resurgence of a number of these vehicles we've been trying to get rid of. aka like the SUVs, which are notoriously horrible, and the giant trucks that nobody really needs except for construction contractors.
Absolutely.
The giant Dodge Ram V8 Hemi supercharged thing that gets 6 miles to the gallon.
Yeah, you don't need that.
So I predict in 2 years' time, those are going to be selling like hotcakes.
I don't know. Do you think there's, maybe some light at the end of the tunnel with regards to global warming? I mean, I keep hearing how, electric cars are going to be a big thing. I keep hearing how solar is going to become bigger and bigger. I don't know. Do you have an opinion on that?
I just think I need to get back into the lab and start designing some of these things. That's what I think.
Yeah, I was reading today on one of the websites that I follow about solar energy. They were talking about one of the national laboratories that we have, and I can't think of the name right now, is nearing the final design of a process by which they can manufacture solar cells at a lot lower price than what they are right now, with similar, if not higher efficiency, using materials called perovskites. I've been hearing about this for years and years, and they think they can have a viable technology that they can sell to people within about a year's time, if not less. And I don't know, I mean, stories like that give me hope that despite who may be in the White House, just the sheer economic drive of our capitalist society may end up solving the problem. Because if you think about it, even if a lot of people, they like to compare fossil fuels like coal, like oil, gas, all these to solar, and they say, right now we have a similar cost per installed unit of energy, but I think what is not factored into that is that once you have a solar array, once you have wind turbines, all that, your fuel is free forever. I mean, as long as these things don't completely break down, your fuel is free forever.
That's the thing, is that the maintenance costs are really quite minimal, typically.
Yes.
And so even if you factor in, like you said, the cost of production, the cost of transportation of these items, because I'm sure we've all seen the wind turbine blades sitting on the back of a semi, and you're like, wow, that's an entire semi trailer worth, and then
Oh
some
yes.
for one blade. You're like, oh my God, that's
I
crazy.
don't know. Have you noticed these going down the Fort Wayne like 69? I've been seeing a lot more of these blades lately, just right on 69.
Well, I guess I haven't seen them myself in that particular location. I just know that, yeah, a lot of them are being put up close to the border of Indiana, Ohio, right there. So that would make sense to me. Um, that they're moving through this area
Yeah.
just to
I
make it to
wonder,
east and south. Yeah.
do you have any idea why we have that big field of solar mills installed just across the border from here and none on this side of the border? Like, what's happening? Any idea? You don't know? Okay.
The fact that Indiana is not quite as progressive as Ohio.
Wow, that's a sad thought. Although, I mean, Ohio is a swing state and Indiana is solidly red, so I guess they are more progressive just by definition there. Um, wow, wow.
Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah, no,
And
but it's okay. Sorry, let me just go
go
on one tangent real quick. Just relating to the wind turbines, we actually had a discussion about this. Me and my wife, we were talking about the economical efficiency as far as how the energy is used in these wind turbines, because people were sitting here and trying to say that, well, because wind turbines have to always be blinking that light, they always have to be exerting a little bit of energy to keep those turbines moving, so to speak, just to
uh-huh.
essentially provide a little oomph into the
Right.
system just to keep it working efficiently. People were sitting here saying, well, doesn't that use like a bunch of energy? I mean, isn't that incredibly inefficient to be pouring energy into these things just to get energy out of these things? Like, at what point does that become inefficient? And I actually saw a study where they collected data on the energy going into and out of these wind turbines. On like a day where they weren't getting any energy out of the wind turbine, they were expending, I think it was like 50 kilowatts of energy.
Yeah.
Kilowatt hours, or I think is the
Right.
unit that
Right.
they were using. It's like 50. All right. On a day where it's actually producing energy and collecting it from the wind,
Yeah.
it was producing 5,000 kilowatt hours
Right.
of energy.
Right. Yeah.
So,
The cost benefit there is negligible. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Quite.
there's been a lot of misinformation out there. I was just reading on a science blog by a guy that I mean, he showed his numbers and you can check his numbers. And when I was reading them as an engineer, I could tell that these were close to true, if not 100% accurate. And he was commenting on a paper that just recently got published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal that was talking about solar panels. And they were comparing the energy required to manufacture a solar panel versus its lifetime output of energy that it can generate. And these guys were really playing with the numbers. I mean, they were manipulating the numbers. They were doing all kinds of crazy things. And, they came up with some number that, let's say it takes 1 kilowatt hour to produce a solar cell over its lifetime, that you would get like 0.8 kilowatt hours out of it, meaning that it would take you more energy to manufacture it than to generate it. But that was so far so wrong. I mean, it was wrong by a factor of many tens. Like, you generate many times more energy than it could ever take to produce that solar panel. But if you manipulate the numbers just right, if you lie with your numbers, if you underestimate numbers, you use old technology, they really messed with the numbers. But those, there is a misinformation campaign out there to confuse people. And sometimes, apparently these guys, their paper had been rejected many times, But eventually they submitted it to enough places, to enough people, that they got just the right combination of peer review, people that did the peer review, and scientific journals, that it actually got published. And now this gives climate skeptics, quote unquote, or people that are just in general opposed to the idea of human-caused global warming, gives them a peer-reviewed paper that they can show to people and say, look, solar doesn't work or wind doesn't work, and all that. And it's just complete nonsense. It's manipulated numbers, it's lies. No scientist would argue for a solution that would be, energy negative, so to say. That would require even more fossil fuels to be used. It just doesn't pass the smell test. But I don't know how to fight this kind of misinformation campaign.
Well, that's the thing, is that one of the great things about my grandpa, despite the fact that he's very religious, he's basically like an assistant pastor every now and then, he actually pays attention to some of this energy stuff. Right. And he even recognized that ethanol from corn is a horrible option because of the exact thing that you just mentioned. At best, it is energy neutral. More often than not, it's maybe a 0.8 kind of ratio, like what you're saying, that you will put in like 20% more energy than you'll be able to ever get out of it, which is not at all efficient, of course. But that's why we've been trying to go to other options for collecting ethanol and using it. Most notably, the option I always love to cite is one that was actually going on at University of Northern Colorado when I was there getting my master's. They were working on algae and having algae make ethanol and secrete it, because algae is a tiny, tiny plant, very, very easy to access the output, so to speak. You don't need a large combine to go through and mow down a bunch of algae. You don't have all those steps. They're unnecessary, essentially, and so it's very, very efficient. So when it's very
go ahead.
It's really about trying to look at the facts, obviously, but also trying to divert the conversation to topics that are actually productive. And so you're absolutely right. Ethanol from corn is a stupid idea. I agree. However, we can get ethanol from other sources, and the best source that we have right now is algae. That seems to be the best thing, because then we can basically just have these tiny, giant, long aquariums of algae. Just put it out there, let it get some sun, collect all the ethanol from it, and boom, you got it.
Yeah, I mean, and you can easily construct these pools, right in the ocean if you wanted to. All you need is to isolate a little more so the algae doesn't leak, and you're not taking up land that can be used to produce food. This thing is just sitting there and making its algae.
That was actually the genius thing that I saw about this article, was that they were doing this in the middle of the desert. They were using completely sealed aquariums, completely sealed, so that you can just do this in space that wouldn't be able to hold crops anyway, because it's a desert.
Right, yeah, and that's the that's the kind of solutions that we need, is that we don't use we don't drive the price up of corn, we don't use land that can be used for something else, or whatever that may be, and it's carbon neutral or next to carbon neutral, and it's a fuel that can be used in our cars today. We don't require new infrastructure. It's something that you just mix with regular gasoline, or there are cars that can just run on ethanol. Some of the race cars out there run straight up ethanol because it has a higher energy density. Now, most cars, I think, can only run up to 15% ethanol blend, but that's still, a partial solution. It's better than the status quo, and we can do it today.
Well, and the other cool thing was that I saw an article, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was talking about us getting better at carbon scrubbing technology.
Yes.
Basically, scrubbing carbon from the air and putting it into the form of ethanol. Most notably, this was using a direct infusion of carbon dioxide gas, along with some nanoparticles and carbon matrix, I think, if I remember correctly.
Uh-huh.
Um, and they were able to effectively start a reaction at the chemical level because they had these little carbon spikes that were able to help get this reaction started with CO2 to make it into ethanol very, very efficiently. It was a one-step process, which is great for chemistry. That's like the holy grail for chemists,
Oh,
is
of
to,
course, of
to have
course.
a one-pot synthesis to where you just do everything in one pot at one time. Boom, you're done. You don't have to do, oh yeah, this process, get maybe 60% out, put it into this process, get maybe 60% out, because that really lowers your yield. It's horrible,
Yeah, yeah,
horribly
yeah.
inefficient. This was a very efficient thing, at least from the setup perspective. Now, unfortunately, using the materials that they were using and the way that they were using it, it was not economical yet. But
Right.
gosh, this is an excellent step in the right direction to scrubbing that carbon dioxide out of the air and turning it into fuel. Because that
Yeah.
would just that would basically cause us to that would enable us to become carbon neutral immediately,
Oh, of course, of course. Yeah.
so that we can try to work on being better than carbon neutral and start reducing the effects of global warming.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that I think is going to happen is, I mean, we're just at the beginning of this renewable revolution, is what people don't realize. You know, we're still down at the single digits in terms of percentages of cars being sold that are electric, in terms of uh, power generated from renewable sources. I mean, we're down in the single digits. So this revolution is just now starting. I think things are going to improve through technology, through all these things so much that eventually, nobody would want a car that runs on gasoline. I mean, because if you have a car that runs on gasoline, you have to keep changing the oil on it. You got to keep going to the gas station, refueling it. There's so much more maintenance on it. Where an electric car has very, very little maintenance. I mean, the electric engines are very efficient. They don't generate much heat. They don't need much oil to lubricate them. It's just some movable parts that provide the energy, the drive force, all that. I mean, you have one moving part inside of an electric engine. Now you may still have a transmission, but for the most part, I don't think you even need that. And in terms of maintenance, in terms of how cheap it would be to drive them, at least for electric cars, I think the future is very, very bright, and I think things are going to turn around really fast. And I think it's going to be the same thing for many other sources out there. So I'm somewhat optimistic on things.
Yeah, I guess my thing that I really am looking forward to as far as vehicles are concerned is getting away from all this mechanical moving part crap, because
Yeah.
it's really starting to bother me. Like, I just got done taking my car to the shop, and that was way more of a costly repair than I was hoping for. As my car was barely drivable, I guess.
Oh, well.
But it was shredding my tires, and the suspension was completely screwed.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I guess my car was trying to self-destruct, but I guess that's what happens at about 150,000 miles.
Yeah, that seems to be about the magic number.
Right. But
Yeah.
I guess the direction I would love to see us going in, if it was even scientifically possible, which it seems like it is possible. I think we're making a little bit of headway on it, but is anti-gravity drives.
Sure.
In those cases, you're basically relying more on electromagnetic forces and fields than you are actually moving parts or projecting particles in different directions to force you to move in certain directions.
Right. Right.
I would love to see that. If we could just take that UFO down at Roswell, we should be able to get this. I mean, come on.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier
space
Humanist
to
Hour.
the road.
Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and on Meetup.com. Thank you for listening. and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.
Way on it.